Asserting central dominion, d4 immediately contests the king's pawn territory and opens diagonals for development. Opening a path for tactical skirmishes and immediately contesting central influence, this develops a key piece harmoniously. Commanding the center and preparing queenside expansion, c4 immediately stakes a claim for space and challenges black's central influence. Solidifying the center, black prepares to develop pieces and potentially challenge white's pawn structure. Developing the knight logically shores up the center and prepares castling, a cornerstone of early king safety. Preparing to fianchetto the bishop, aiming for queenside counterplay. Preparing the fianchetto solidifies the queenside and eyes the long diagonal, anticipating black's bishop development. Disrupting white's pawn structure and activating the bishop creates immediate counterplay. By challenging the bishop, white reinforces the central pawn structure and prepares to develop the queenside, creating a more solid defensive setup. Expanding queenside ambition, this pawn thrust fights for space and prepares queenside development, though it weakens the b6 pawn. Solidifying the kingside pawn structure allows white to prepare for central expansion or an eventual queenside pawn advance. Securing the king is a prudent decision, preparing the pieces for future central engagement and solidifying black's structural integrity. Castling securely tucks your monarch away, establishing a crucial defensive perimeter for the looming central conflict. Developing the bishop to this active diagonal eyes the queenside and forces white to consider their pawn structure. Securing the queen on a central square facilitates future queenside expansion and defends the c-pawn. Black immediately challenges white's central setup, aiming to break open lines and exploit the queen's exposed position. Exchanging the bishop opens the queenside for white's rook, but it concedes the bishop pair to black. Opening the file for your rook creates immediate dynamic play and exposes white's queen. Developing the knight to a square where it can support the central pawn push or prepare for a kingside attack offers flexibility. Re-establishing the bishop's diagonal control after the forced exchange. Pressuring the queenside is the idea here, aiming to exploit the advanced queenside pawn structure after the exchange. The knight galvanizes the center, preparing to redeploy and challenge white's queenside pressure with dynamic counterplay. Solidifying the center and preparing to support the d4 pawn advance is the key idea behind this pawn push. Repositioning the rook to the 7th rank aims to infiltrate the queenside and challenge white's pawn structure, though it surrenders active development. Opening the central c-file provides an immediate avenue for pressure against black's doubled pawns and potential breakthroughs. Opening that queen's diagonal for the bishop significantly enhances its scope, aiming to pressure white's central pawn structure. Rearranging the bishop to a more active diagonal opens up lines for the queen and prepares for potential kingside expansion. Unveiling the bishop's diagonal invites pressure down the c-file, a risky gamble for piece activity. Initiating an assault on the queenside, this pawn push aims to disrupt black's passive bishop and gain valuable territory. Asserting queenside space, this move prepares to challenge white's central control and potentially open lines for counterplay. Targeting the weaker pawn creates immediate pressure and exploits black's awkward rook placement. Opening that b-file creates immediate pressure on white's queenside pawns. Trading the bishop for the knight opens the file, creating long-term pressure on black's queenside. Opening the file for your rook with this pawn capture creates immediate central pressure. Clearing the rook now pressures that isolated pawn and prepares for queenside dominance. The rook's sacrifice unveils a devastating discovered check, shattering the queenside and forcing a dramatic turn of events. The queens are exchanged, simplifying the position and potentially leading to sharper play with limited material. Swapping off your bishop for their knight now solidifies your pawn structure. Knight repositions to seize control of the d3 square, aiming to disrupt black's queenly presence and exert pressure on the central pawn structure. The bishop retreats, seeking greater influence and avoiding immediate exchange on the queen side. Unleashing the queen to seize the open file, white forces tactical exchanges and aims to exploit black's pawn structure weakness. Exchanging queens here initiates a simplified position where black aims to leverage their active bishop and potential outpost. Liberating the rook to the open file, this repositioning sets the stage for endgame dominance, eyeing vulnerable pawns. Initiating a bold initiative to unburden your bishop and exploit the semi-open c-file. Reinforcing the central pawn chain, this prepares to eventually contest the open c-file and offers a potential escape square for the king. Initiating a kingside pawn storm, threatening to unravel white's defensive structure. Securing the king's safety becomes paramount with this move, anticipating potential disruptions on the king side. Asserting control over the open c-file, this rook's repositioning directly challenges white's queenside structure and prepares for potential infiltration. Controlling the open 7th rank with the rook offers a vital outpost, though it does leave the kingside pawns slightly exposed. Exploiting the open file, black immediately challenges white's rook, aiming to disrupt the queenside structure. Unleashing a bold tactical strike, white injects immediate chaos, seeking to dismantle black's already precarious pawn structure and exploit the king's relative safety. Unleashing the rook's power on the open file forces white's king into a precarious position, disrupting their developing coordination. Unleashing the knight to infiltrate black's weakened kingside, creating immediate tactical threats. Sacrificing the rook to break open the king's defenses is a bold, desperate attempt to create immediate chaos. Shielding the king with a cautious repositioning, while black's rook aggressively probes. King hunt engaged. A forced march toward the enemy monarch commences with this check, aiming to exploit the exposed royal presence. King's safety is paramount. Repositioning toward the center offers potential refuge from the relentless knight and bishop harassment. Unleashing the knight to challenge white's central king is a promising maneuver for black. Challenging the isolated rook, white probes for weaknesses in black's exposed king position. Prioritizing king's safety becomes paramount. The monarch needs to escape the exposed position. Initiating knight repositioning to a more active square on the king side. Reactivating the rook along the open file is a bold attempt to stir up activity in this quiet position. Snatching the pawn simplifies, opening lines and aiming to exploit black's potentially exposed king. A desperate maneuver, sacrificing the rook to gain time, yet leaving the king exposed to further threats. The king tucks away, seeking shelter amidst the impending chaos of the open board. The rook's repositioning to the enemy's back rank is a sharp tactical stab, aiming to exploit white's compromised king's safety. Unleashing the king, aiming to disrupt black's pawn structure and activate remaining pieces. Unleashing the rook to disrupt white's precarious kingside pawn structure and create counterplay. Securing the d5 pawn with the knight allows white to reinforce the center and prepare for future pawn advances. This recapture drives the enemy king into a corner, a crucial step towards simplifying into a winning endgame. Prioritizing king's safety becomes paramount as the monarch ventures into the center. Shifting the rook to the 5th rank aims to disrupt white's control over the open b-file and potentially set up a counterattack. Snatching the pawn on h5 creates immediate tactical chaos, potentially exposing your own king as black retaliates. Consolidating the king's safety becomes paramount now, preparing for potential pawn pushes in the center. Forcing the black king out of its cozy pawn shelter creates immediate danger. The king ventures out, seeking safety on the queen side but walking into a potential storm. King hunting begins with a knight fork, aiming to disrupt black's defenses and exploit the exposed royal. This king's desperate scramble offers the opponent tactical entry points across the board. Recapturing the pawn reestablishes material equality and prepares to activate the rook on the open d-file. Introducing a pawn to g5 seeks to expand kingside space and potentially attack white's knight, but it creates weaknesses around black's king. Unleashing a fork, This move decisively targets the black king and rook, forcing a material concession. A bold advance into enemy territory, sacrificing pawn structure for a last-ditch counterplay effort. This rook retreat clears the way for the knight to potentially penetrate deeper into black's position, initiating a desperate counterattack, forcing the white king to flee the open file.